Hi, guys. How are the sandwiches?
Excellent.
Great. Good. No charge to you guys, thanks.
Awesome. It's a nice gesture, we just can't accept it.
What are you doing over there?
Oh, it's really exciting. I sell stuff on eBay. I got all kinds of stuff, shoes, clothes. It looks like this. Do you have any old stuff you wanted to get rid of?
Were they just calling us right now?
I don't know.
My divorce is final and I'm a free woman.
Get your arms behind your back.
I am!
I'm gonna cuff him.
You wish.
Hold on. He needs another ride.
The law enforcement code of ethics is extremely important. It's something that we spend a lot of time on with newer officers, especially in the academy. You're grilled on reciting it and really memorizing the law enforcement code of ethics, and it's referred to a lot in the academy and maybe in your first few years as a police officer. But as you progress through your career, what we learn is, unfortunately, people lose sight of that, and I think we need to really revisit that and rededicate ourselves as professionals to what that really means to us.
Ethics can mean many different things to different people. In law enforcement, what's important is that there is a solid ethical foundation supporting the decisions officers are faced with on a daily basis. My name is Mark Bailey. I'm a former full-time and current reserve police officer, and I will be your guide through this training. Officers touch the lives of so many people every day. What they do and how they act will have an impact on these people, and it is critical that they act in a manner that reflects a sense of service to people and their community. The purpose of this training is for officers to understand what ethics is and learn how to make decisions based upon ethics. During the course of this video, you will view several scenarios. They do not necessarily depict best practices or provide the correct answer, and sometimes no answer is provided. The goal of the scenarios is to encourage discussion on how you would handle this situation in your department, keeping in mind applicable laws and department policy. Segments of this training include the ethical approach, unethical decisions, tools for making ethical decisions, ethical crossroads, taking action, and honoring the public trust. Making sound, ethically based decisions isn't always easy. The first step to making those decisions requires defining what ethics is.
A very simple definition of ethics is doing the right thing even when no one's looking.
I mean, ethics is essentially, the study of right versus wrong, but it's all based upon through your lens of what your values and your virtues are.
Ethics is having integrity, doing the right thing.
So when you're talking about the positive ethics, you're talking about human excellence and the human potential for excellence. So it's really about how people act and how they behave.
We were hired to do this job because we had good moral character, and we're expected to exercise that on a regular basis. And that's a day in and day out decision-making process.
When you come across those right versus wrong dilemmas, well, that's not really an ethical dilemma. I mean, it's either right or it's wrong. You don't do it.
There's the legal line that is very simply anything decision that is made or actions taken below the legal line, we know what the consequence could be. It's an illegal act, it's against policy, against the law, whatever it may be, and we know the consequences. But then there's another line, it's the ethical act. And anything above that line is not only legal, but it's also ethical. Where officers really get themselves in trouble and have some struggles is in between those two lines. It may have been legal or within department policy, but is it ethical? And it's that gray area, or I say the red area in between those two lines is where officers really get themselves in a lot of trouble.
What do you do when you don't know what's right, when you don't know what's ethical? That's why you have to have a decision-making process.
And officers need to develop that process for the ethical dilemmas they will continually face throughout their career. In approaching these dilemmas, there are 4 key steps to take. It starts with recognizing a situation as an ethical or moral issue. The next step is to evaluate the situation by applying moral principles. The third step is to determine the most ethical approach. The final step is to take action according to the determination that was made. Once officers are able to recognize, evaluate, determine, and take action, they'll find this approach useful not only for the big ethical crises, but also for the smaller issues that come up regularly.
It's a crazy car crash. I'm just glad nobody was hurt. Absolutely. Well, if you're ready, let's get the check and hit the road. Let's do it.
Hi, guys. How about the sandwiches?
Excellent. Great.
Good. No charge to you guys. Thanks.
Awesome. It's a nice gesture. We just can't accept it.
The owner won't let me charge law enforcement. I'm sorry.
Any chance I can maybe pay their check?
I suppose so. It's $11.25.
There you go. That'll cover it. Keep the change.
Thanks. Have a good day, guys.
It's pretty cool. I haven't thought of that.
I think it's so cool. Don't forget you owe me $8 for lunch.
No problem. It's pretty cool. I haven't thought of that.
I think it's so cool. Don't forget you owe me $8 for lunch.
No problem. What'd you think? Pretty interesting. What'd you think about that?
I think it's a situation that law enforcement officers are faced with on a daily basis. This was just a creative way of handling that situation, and everyone comes out a winner.
What are some other ways we might have handled that situation?
Well, one thing I like to do is carry actual cash, because if you only have to pay with credit, you're going to sit there and argue back and forth, whereas cash, you can just lay it on the counter and walk away, with a thank you for the offer.
What about if you know an establishment like that gives you 50% off or doesn't charge law enforcement officers? What about the idea of just not going to that restaurant at all? Is that obviously a viable option?
It's always an option.
Absolutely.
Okay. Why in law enforcement should we not take gratuities?
Because we don't want the perception or the expectation that we're going to cut them a favor in payback for what they're giving us.
Okay, and where does that cause problems with the management or the community?
Both. I think the management might have an expectation of being let off maybe for some sort of offense, and then when the public perceives or sees an officer skip payment on a meal, then I think they feel kind of wronged. That they're having to pay. Why shouldn't we?
Great point. Okay. And do you feel that taking a gratuity like that, whether it's a half-price meal or a full-price meal, is a slippery slope to corruption?
Yes. Yes, it is.
I agree.
In what way?
People tend to think, or we have dealt with, once we give in a little bit, how hard is it to go a little farther?
The senior officer stopped the junior officer and say, hey, look, here's how we're going to rectify that situation. Was that pretty powerful?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And is that going to have how is that going to have a lasting effect on that junior officer?
Hopefully career-wise. Because if he gets that impression the first time from his FTO, he understands all the officers feel the same way. And as FTOs, we have to train our officers that way. So in the long term, they already have it ingrained in their head. Okay,
excellent point. The two people that the senior officer bought food for, it isn't every day that they get someone to buy them lunch, correct? How does that look positive that law enforcement officers actually bought them their lunch? Right? Did these officers turn a negative into a positive for the community?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and how is that going to overall affect the law enforcement image?
You never know what their perception of law enforcement has been, or whether they've had a positive or negative contact with a law enforcement officer. And so just this one gesture may be the one thing that has them take a second look at our profession and take away from that negativity they see on the news or read in the paper, and they've actually had something positive in person happen for them or with them.
Excellent point. So this senior officer then took a negative and turned it completely into an extremely positive situation. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. What if, think of the senior officer. Well, actually, let's look at the senior officer and junior officer relationship. What did the senior officer just teach that junior officer?
To do the right thing.
Do the right thing. Do you think that's going to have a long-lasting effect on him in his future?
If he sees that kind of actions being done by the senior officers on a daily basis, yes. And hopefully when he becomes a senior officer, he'll be able to show that to a junior officer.
Okay, so that could have a positive, obviously, effect on all of law enforcement throughout his career, whoever he comes in contact with.
Yes.
Okay. What happens if this officer gets out of law enforcement? That was his last act in public service. How's that legacy going to continue, or what's his legacy going to be?
That junior officer.
Okay, so as he leaves public service, his legacy is that junior officer and teaching that junior officer
The right thing.
the right thing. Excellent, thank you.
Some communities where if you go into a restaurant or you go into a 7-Eleven store, where they'll just give you the coffee. They refuse to take your money. And that poses a dilemma.
What happens when people are offering you things out of the goodness of their heart, and there is not that expectation that you're going to give something back, not that quid pro quo that makes gratuities really kind of difficult for us. And what do you do in that situation?
I don't think there's many officers probably in the country that haven't had that very experience where someone wants to show their appreciation in a very nice way by maybe comping a meal or by offering some sort of gratuity. And, on its surface, it's a nice gesture.
Well, I think it's important to recognize when people appreciate that, appreciate what we do. We don't always get that kind of appreciation from people in the community. We can recognize it without necessarily taking gratuities for it.
The reality of it is it can be misconstrued by other people that are present. It's not the sort of relationship we want to have officers establishing with local businesses for obvious reasons.
Because at first, things are appreciated, whether it be a discount at a coffee shop. But we need to be careful not to then move on to the next phase, which could become expected. You don't want to expect certain things and then almost obligate the individual to give it to you, at which point you start demanding that the community provide certain things for you.
Oftentimes, unfortunately, we've been in a restaurant where we go up to pay for something and they'll say, oh no, police discount, we want the police discount. And, there's 3 or 4 people behind you in line looking at you like, I don't get a discount. Why does this police officer get a discount? And that really just doesn't sit well with the public, and it really shouldn't, quite frankly.
So I think a veteran officer in this case has clearly come up with his strategy, if you will, to deal with something that he probably that comes up periodically. And he's come up with a pretty effective strategy of not only not offending the person who's trying to offer some sort of display of appreciation, but at the same time, really not accepting gratuity. He just kind of passes it on, or I guess as they say these days, pays it forward. And the reaction of the younger officer is hopefully he takes something away from that.
How did that impact the clerk at the deli when he thought, gee, this is great that police officers would want to do this? How does it impact the people who are sitting at the table when they go up and say, I want to pay for my lunch, and the guy behind the counter says, no, those police officers paid for it? Is that a big ethical decision? Is that an enormous ethical decision? But is it significant in the lives of a lot of people? Absolutely.
I think a great example of something seemingly so small and so insignificant that ends up being so profound down the road is San Diego officer Jeremy Henwood. His last act before he was tragically murdered and killed was he was at a McDonald's buying lunch for himself. And he was approached by a 13-year-old kid who didn't have enough money to pay for a cookie. And so captured on surveillance is Officer Henwood buying a cookie for this child. That was his last act that was captured on video. And it was one of kindness, it was one of giving, and that's how he's always going to be remembered. That's going to be his legacy.
While not all officers are going to have their legacy based upon one small act of kindness, recognizing that each and every act can make a difference in others is key to understanding the importance of having strong individual ethics. Without a solid moral standing, you risk making decisions that will gradually compromise your individual ethics. The concept of a gradual change in values that ultimately corrupts officers is known as the continuum of compromise.
In a continuum of compromise, it's similar to the analogy of the frog in the water that starts to boil, and that frog will remain there and will get comfortable even with that boiling water.
Continuum of compromise focuses on how officers compromise their integrity. It starts with small stuff.
Small ethical compromises that people make, they sometimes could lead to nothing, But then again, they also could start to become ingrained in a person or an organization or even an entire profession. And those small little things can grow into larger issues. And if you look at all the police scandals that have happened in the last 30, 40 years, I would venture to guess that every single one of them, you can go back to the root cause and you can see the small ethical things that were ignored, those small issues that started to grow and expand. And once those things got let go of or were ignored, that's what grew into these huge, massive police misconduct.
A trap that we generally fall into when it comes to ethical decision making is we fall into this trap of what I call the myth of two choices, that there's usually just one of two choices that you could go with. And oftentimes if we just step back, take a little bit more time, we can find alternative solutions. Sometimes we surround ourselves by the right people where we can bounce things off of, and you'll come up with alternatives. And so that's one thing that you don't want to fall into, is this myth that there's only one of two ways that you can go.
Well, I think special relationships start to get in the way, because what they do is they start to cloud the officer's perception of situations, their perception of what is right and what is the more right. And it starts to get into that, again, that gray area when we have those special relationships that come into play. And that's one of the pitfalls that I think a lot of officers have in those type of situations.
There are many examples of pitfalls and traps that officers can become the victim of when they start to compromise their personal ethics. But the good news is, all is not lost just because you have taken a misstep. There are ways to get back on the right track, and it starts with taking the time to make the correct decision.
You are 5 times more likely to make the right decision when you slow down and take time. Anytime you do a snap judgment, that's where you're usually going to be making the wrong decision. So it's all about slowing down and surrounding yourself by the right kind of people.
There's a continuum that at points I can stop. I can make a decision and I can stop. And I can say, let me have this conversation with myself. Did I make a good decision there? Is this something that I really want to be proud of? Is this something that squares with my moral beliefs, that squares with the virtues that I have as an individual? Does it square with that?
Just because somebody maybe makes a bad decision or doesn't have the ethical courage today, doesn't mean tomorrow that tomorrow's not a new day and that you could make an ethical decision, you could develop that ethical courage. Just because you went down this path today doesn't mean you can't take a different path tomorrow.
We're all human beings, and as long as we continue to recruit from the human race, people are going to be susceptible to temptation. But there's ways to avoid that, and one of the easiest ways to avoid that is, start asking yourself, do a mental exercise. What are things that I value? What do I hold true? Is my family most important to me? Do I hold human dignity and service? Are these things that I hold true and valuable and that I keep at the forefront of my mind? And if I keep them there, then it's going to be a lot less likely that I'm going to be to fall susceptible to temptation, because these are things that are uncompromisable. These are things that I believe in my heart and are at the forefront of my mind, and that's what I think is really going to prevent us from falling into temptation.
In this segment, we'll explore the reasons why officers make unethical decisions. We will also look at the importance of continually working on your personal ethics so that you are prepared to deal with the situations that risk compromising them. Peace officers are called to serve and protect the community first. However, as human beings, we are subject to the same pressures and temptations that everyone faces. How we deal with those is the key to maintaining our integrity throughout our career.
My eBay thing I was telling you about? Yeah. If you had any old clothes or shoes, if you wanted to get rid of any of those, I sell stuff on eBay. Okay. Do you have any old baby clothes that you wanted to sell? Yeah. If you want to bring those, I can sell them for you. And then I get a small percentage of it. Okay. Oh, great. Well, that sounds awesome.
I gotta go.
Okay. Are you working tomorrow?
Yes.
Yeah. If you want to bring that stuff by tomorrow, we can take care of it then.
Okay.
All right. Great. Okay. Talk to you later. Bye. Have a good one. Hey, Jill, can you open up that eBay page? I wanted to show Julie what it was about.
Oh, sure.
So I don't know if you knew, but I sell stuff on eBay.
How does that work?
Oh, well, I got to sell some stuff for her, and
You
I
can
make a
make
small
some money.
percentage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if you had some stuff laying around the house that you wanted to get rid of,
Yeah, I do. I have shoes, purses, things like that.
that would be awesome. You could bring that stuff, and we can take care of it sometime.
Great.
Can I help you?
I need you to cut me a sup on that domestic.
Yeah, no problem. I got it handled. Absolutely.
What are you doing over there?
Oh, it's really exciting. I sell stuff on eBay. I got all kinds of stuff, shoes, clothes. It looks like this. Do you have any old stuff you wanted to get rid of?
Yeah, I got some stuff.
Oh, that would be great. If you bring it to work tomorrow, we can handle it then.
Unit to respond. Were they just calling us right now?
I don't know.
Were they just calling us right now?
I don't know.
What'd you think?
Should be bringing your personal life to work.
Bringing your personal life into work? Do you feel this was a problem?
Absolutely.
Okay. Besides bringing your personal life into work, what else are we doing? I mean, what's the problem with this whole thing?
She's doing another job when she should be doing her regular job.
So her focus as a peace officer is completely
Selling stuff on the computer.
Okay. What does the community expect of us?
They expect.
Go ahead, sir.
Sorry about that. They expect us to go out there and be ready to answer the radio. They expect us to be out there looking for people to put into jail. They're out there, looking for traffic violations, things like that. If you're too busy looking on the computer for, things for your business all the time, obviously you can't do both things at the same time.
Excellent point. And I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
I think the issue goes goes beyond just the fact that she's making money, she's conducting business. It goes to the fact that if you're getting paid for 10 hours, you should be working 10 hours.
What has to be missing for behavior like this to actually occur? Why isn't this being stopped?
There's a lack of supervision and consistency. And I find that a lot with policy violation, that you let something slip a little bit, it tends to get worse and worse. And it's what used to be unacceptable is now the norm. As far as, like I said, social media, fantasy football, whatever they're doing on duty when they should be focused on the task and being productive in their job.
Okay. Besides affecting the lady at the front counter, did it affect any other part of their job function during that video? Did you see any other issues?
As, a partner out there, you depend on this person to be listening to the radio. So if you're in need, they can respond. If they're busy or their mind is occupied on something else, they might not come. And so that is a safety issue. And I think she was making coworkers uncomfortable because she was very pushy on the subject and just kept, just got really involved in it. And I think it caught some other employees off guard.
Excellent point. Do you think her pushiness, as you said, might have gone way too far because of this sworn civilian aspect?
Yes.
And
they might be more inclined to saying, yes, they will do it even though they don't want to, because they feel that pushiness. And because she's wearing a uniform, it's hard to say no.
Okay, so they may not, in this situation you probably said, they may not be saying yes because they want to, but they feel it's a sworn officer, sworn deputy, so I kind of have to do this.
Right.
Okay, good point. What obligation did the other employees who are being bullied or pressured into this, what obligation do they have to either bring this up to the lady that's selling or to supervision?
Well, they could handle it one of two ways. They could bring it to her directly and just let her know that they feel uncomfortable with her behavior, and that may cure the problem. However, if it continues, then they may feel the need to bring it to the next level, which would be the sergeant and or lieutenant level.
Excellent point.
We should be able to police ourselves and simply say to that employee, hey, this is not the time, but let's talk at lunch. Okay. That way there's the actual defined break, and you can look at something like that where it's more, where the public can see that and say, they're at lunchtime, not in a public setting, but in a closed setting.
Okay, I like that. Is it hard for us to do sometimes to confront our own peers about a problem?
Of course.
Why is that? And I'll follow it up with this, is we don't mind confronting parolees, we don't mind confronting people in fights or in dangerous situations. Why do we have a problem confronting other employees with ethical violations within our own organization?
We have a relationship with these people. So it's like family. You're dealing with somebody in the family, you don't want to hurt their feelings or be seen on the other side of the quote blue line. We don't want to cross it, supposedly.
Okay.
ultimately it falls on us to bring that attention. It really does. And, we should, like you said, if we're able to confront criminals out there, we should be able to confront our own, even if they are family.
Okay, great point.
This person was seemingly doing something that was fairly innocuous. I mean, they were running their business. Lots of people run their business.
In this day and age, a lot of officers have secondary employment. They may have other things that are occupying their lives for whatever reason.
With hard economic times and some of the cutbacks, there would be a great temptation to look for other avenues of revenue.
They may be in a financial crisis. They can be having problems at home. There's quite a few things where this can start.
When you start living beyond your means, or when you see that there's rewards out there that are available for you because of the position that you hold, you can start neglecting the community if you start compromising your personal ethics.
The ethical decisions that she made impacted so many other people. First of all, it impacted the public.
And that's one of those, I think it's an ethical decision that it may be contrary to policy, it may not be, but it is really an unethical behavior to be doing, your own job, a different job, while you're being paid by the public to do a certain job as a police officer.
I think it's really easy for us in our profession sometimes to become entitled, where we think sometimes we're owed something. And the fact of the matter is that we're not owed anything. We actually owe the community a lot. We owe them our service. In fact, there's probably no higher purpose than serving others.
The important thing is that we stay focused on our mission at hand, which is public service. Anything that would compromise that, we have to second guess and wonder whether or not it's worth the risk.
And when you're dealing with the public trust, and you're dealing with public funds that are paying officers, you're starting to deal with basically a theft of public funds.
We're losing sight of what we're really getting paid to do. What are we there to do? We're there to be police officers, and go back to the thing about service. We're there to serve the community.
And that every decision, every act that we do has got to come from the perspective and the lens that I'm doing this for the community that has put an enormous amount of trust into me and our brothers and sisters in law enforcement to go out there and make the right decisions and provide them a service that they deserve.
If you really put a light on it and the public really looked at what officers were doing and what our employees were doing, I don't think they're expecting us to be profiting and running a side business when we should be getting paid to go out there and prevent crimes and respond to crimes and really do the job that we were paid to do.
They've given us an enormous amount of trust, and we owe that to them to make sure that every minute we spend is dedicated and committed to serving them.
So I think this would be a situation where perhaps an officer just hasn't really given it much thought, and that's where, again, our own self-policing, our own responsibility to set a high standard really comes into play.
Setting a high standard in an organization is something that's accomplished through example, conversation, and leadership. Sometimes this standard can be compromised when supervisors unintentionally put pressures on their officers to perform in ways that may conflict with the organization's values.
One of the things we have to, as an organization, really as a profession, have to look at from a supervisory and a management level is what are we portraying to our officers, our ethical values? And sometimes we may be portraying the wrong message unknowingly. And example of that is some of the gamesmanship that we endorse at a department. For instance, rewarding somebody that may have the highest number of felony arrests, or, hey, I'm going to buy a dinner to the next officer who recovers a gun off the street, or X amount of narcotics-related arrests. What are we really saying there? Because if we're really pushing that, are officers losing sight of how they're obtaining it? Do the ends justify the means? Yeah, we want them to go out there and be productive, but really more than that, we want them to do it the right way, in the ethical way.
One of the pitfalls of having individuals stay in a particular assignment, especially very sensitive or critical assignments, is the fact that they will build, which is a good thing, they will build great cohesion. But similar to what happened with my department in the Rampart scandal, is you had a very cohesive unit, and you will have individuals that then start compromising their personal ethics which in turn leads to the compromise of department ethical policies and ultimately the professional code of ethics. So you have to be very mindful of continuously monitoring and ensuring that individuals that are in sensitive units or assignments do not go unmonitored or unsupervised.
Sometimes in our job, we'll be faced with dilemmas that initially may not even really seem like a big ethical dilemma, when in reality, when you stop and think about it, really is. The pressures, especially nowadays with some of the budgetary constraints and so many agencies relying on asset forfeiture money to run their departments, to supplement budgets and to do things in their department. Are we really telling our investigators and our officers that recovering money and asset forfeiture money is really that important? Is it more important than recovering a large amount of narcotics or arresting a perpetrator? You know, maybe you have two cars going a different way, and one of them's loaded with a lot of narcotics that you know is going to end up on the street, and one's has a little bit of cash. You know, which one are you going to stop? You know, are you going to stop the one with the cash because you want the asset forfeiture money, or are you going to stop the one with the drugs? We don't want to put the pressure on the officers to really think that they have to perform and go out there and really go after the money and the forfeiture and not really do what may be in the best interest of everybody.
I think the interesting thing about ethics is it's not at all black and white. The law is black and white. It's written to be either it is or it isn't illegal. We write policy to be black and white. We use words like shall and shall not. But when it comes to ethical conduct, when it comes to right and wrong, and ethical and unethical, sometimes those come down to the more gray areas of moral values and principles. So it's a little bit more hard to interpret. But certainly there are tests that we can give ourselves to know whether we're inside the confines of ethical conduct.
We have a lot of tools we put in our little toolbox. You know, we have the Bell Book Candle. You know, that's one tool that we can use. We can use the team concept, teach, enforce, advocate model.
The key is when you get that first kind of feeling that something's not right, that you don't dismiss it. Because when you do, that's when you really start going down the road of compromising your own personal ethics and then ultimately the professional ethics of a police officer.
Paying attention to a feeling that something is just not right has been referred to as the Bell warning that is part of the Bell Book Candle model. This is one of several tools officers can use in the process of making decisions that we'll discuss in this segment. Regardless of which approach you take, the first step is recognizing when you are in an ethical situation.
One of the important things to recognize about police work is that nearly every decision you make is going to have an impact on other people, usually a citizen or perhaps somebody that you've taken into custody, a victim of a crime. Most things you involve yourself in law enforcement have ethical implications.
That was a pretty epic party last night, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Beer pong champions.
What are the chances of Ronnie coming in sick today?
Oh man, he was wasted before he even got there.
Yeah, it was getting ugly. I left early. Hey, you guys, check out Ronnie's Facebook page. Oh, whoa.
I can't believe you posted that.
Yeah, he looked so sad just lying there. I had to spruce him up a bit.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Morning, Sarge.
Hey, we're going to be a little short today. Ronnie called in sick again. That means we're short tonight. Marissa, I didn't want to get off early, but you can't.
What about my kids?
I understand. After briefing, let you make some phone calls, try and work that out.
Okay, I'll start making some calls then.
In front of you, you got the briefing sheet with the 459 suspects. There's 2 males and a vehicle on it. Been hitting in the city and around the county. They've been hitting all over the place, so. Been hitting in the city and around the county. They've been hitting all over the place, so.
What'd you think?
I think with the advent of social media and with those pictures that are posted on Facebook, there's been several different court cases around the country where all that is discoverable by the defense, and all the defense needs to do is now present the image of that officer to the court, and not only does it make that officer look bad, but then it spirals down to the department and then the rest of his fellow workmates.
Okay, good. So we have a problem with the posting of the Facebook photos, correct? Okay. Is that a violation of policy?
Depends.
In what way?
Depends if your department has that in place yet. Most departments are going that way, but it may or may not be a department policy for your agency yet.
Okay. Whether it is or isn't, could it still be an ethical issue?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, somebody posts photos of this officer on Facebook. Okay, he's drunk and he calls in sick. What did that do to everybody? I mean, that whole shift, what just happened?
Disappointment, letdown,
Why is that?
because you depend on each other. And so when one fails, everybody else suffers on that team. So, you think twice, before doing something because it'll affect your team, whether it be calling in sick or making the decision to call in sick.
Why don't we have a problem with this behavior before it affects us personally? You saw the officers laughing and joking about this photograph, correct? Why didn't we care about that? Why did we only care after it affected us or affected them?
I think the bigger picture is not, the social media is part of it, but I think the fact that the guy might have a drinking problem and need some resources made available to him through the city. But, it is stressing the minimum staffing for the department and the officers' ability to get time off. But the underlying issue seems to be maybe an alcoholic problem.
What happens when we do go to him and he says, you know what, no, I don't have a problem, I'm fine, don't worry about it? What step do we need to take now? Or do we?
As line level, we would speak to supervision, and it's not just only as us that gets affected. We're talking the people get affected. Now we got more calls for service stacking up, people are not getting the appropriate service, and other injuries can occur from that. So we have other outlying problems.
Okay. So not only for the agency, but we also have the public, the community we got to answer to, correct? Okay. And you touched on it a little bit ago with social media. Why do we need to be careful with posting this stuff? These type of pictures?
Because as law enforcement officers, we're held to a certain standard. Whether we like it or not, the public expects us to behave a certain way. And, they hold us a little bit higher than the general public, than any other regular person.
When we talk about this enabling behavior at this party, what do you think about this? Someone had to take the picture, someone had to draw on his face, and then he thought it was funny enough to post on this social media website. Do you see that as being a problem?
Yes.
In what way?
They're kind of contributing to the fun of getting drunk and out of control by doing the drawing, taking the picture, drinking in beyond moderation, and contributing to the whole problem of it. And I have no idea why the guy would post his own photo on the social media when it's like that. But it's probably a poor decision, maybe not thought when he's clear-headed, but it reflects badly.
Okay, excellent. So as his friends, as his partners in law enforcement, we owe it to not only him, we owe it to the community and to the agency to stop this before it becomes a big problem, correct?
Right. And as a teammate, I think, knowing he arrived there drunk, maybe, prevented him from drinking even more and getting to the point where he passes out. And instead of drawing on his face, maybe giving him some coffee and making sure he was okay.
Okay, very good point. And as his partners and friends, we owe it to him to get him that help, correct?
Yes.
Before it becomes a problem.
Well, I think there's a lot of times that we try to do different activities to build camaraderie, and camaraderie is a good thing. We have to know that we can count on one another, brothers and sisters in law enforcement. But again, we have to remember what our focus is here.
If I'm doing things off duty, will it reflect on duty? Yes, it will. At some point, they do meet, so we have to constantly be vigilant of the things that we're doing off duty.
We have to think about the things we do, make conscious decisions about if we decide to drink or do other activities like gambling, things like that that could be legal where you're at. but you have to think about, is it sending the right message?
As a police officer, you have an ethical responsibility to be good at what you do, to be really good at what you do. And when officers don't give their best effort, and when they're not as proficient as they should be, what they should recognize is that probably has an ethical implication.
And that off-duty behavior does matter. And even if it is off-duty, when it starts affecting your work life, if it starts affecting your fellow officers, it starts affecting your department and your profession, that is an issue. And in this situation, I think the other ethical dilemma is from the coworkers who basically saw an issue, kind of joked about it, but didn't do anything about it until it affected them personally.
Where was the ethical responsibility that this person's coworkers had to step in and intervene before it got to that point?
You know, and that's really where we as a law enforcement profession, as a brotherhood and sisterhood, it's really important for us to assist other officers in those type of ethical dilemmas.
You should have the courage to make sure that that officer doesn't drink too much, that things don't get out of hand, and really have the courage to do something about it.
We can't rely on simply our supervisors to make all the decisions for us. As a law enforcement officer, you make independent decisions every day. When you're out on patrol, whether you're working in the jail, you're working in the courts, it doesn't matter. You have to make decisions on a regular basis. And if you're going to wait for someone to come along to tell you what the right thing is to do, that's the wrong way to handle business.
Those officers should be looking out for one another. And really, you should, when you're looking out for each other, stop it before it gets to that point.
One thing that is really lost sight of sometimes when it comes to ethics is the importance of relationships. Relationships are so key. You can't have any of those courageous conversations with your people if you see people going down the wrong road. You can't even begin to have those conversations with them that are credible and reliable and something that they're going to believe in if you haven't established a relationship with people. And that's why it's, you know, one of the very foundations and the groundwork you have to lay as an ethical person is to build relationships with people, your family members, your peers, your coworkers, your supervisors.
We tell people, hey, you're family. You're part of our family at our department. You're family. Well, are we really treating that person like family when we really let them go down this destructive path and really don't have the courage to come up to them as a family member and say, hey, I love you. You're going down the wrong path, and let's get you some help.
Building close relationships with coworkers that includes looking out for each other is an essential foundation for a strong team. But sometimes, when left unchecked, these strong ties can lead to other perils that grow out of what is referred to as a permissive environment.
We've seen numerous examples in law enforcement history, recent history, from various different agencies throughout the state of permissive environments where smaller things happened first and they were overlooked and maybe not corrected, and then those led to larger compromises and down the road to very serious incidents.
If you drill down on those cases, what you'll come back to is a group of officers who have cut themselves off from the rest of the organization, officers who have set their own standard, who play by their own rules, and don't feel like they're held accountable, feel like they can go their own way.
Well, it's kind of like what you ignore, you condone. What you look away from, you condone, whether it be poor behavior of your partners or of yourself.
So each day we have to think about what or where are we going to draw the line.
One of the most effective tools for departments to use in setting high standards is the field training officer. The example they set and how they interact with new officers will influence the decisions those officers make throughout their career.
Your training officer should be your cream of the core for a department and stuff, because they are setting the standard. What a person learns in their FTO training will stay with them throughout their entire career. Good examples and bad examples.
And they're the ones that set the example for you in real life practice. You're out responding to calls, providing service for the community, and they set the example as to how does this actually work in the real world. If those people that are the training officers don't set that good example, don't socialize our people in the right way, then it sets us up for problems down the road.
As an FTO, you have to have that higher standard of ethics, and you have to be able to teach it. You have to be able to be that good ethical role model in everything you do. Because the ethics that you're teaching, the ethics that you're role modeling are going to affect that officer throughout their entire career.
Setting high standards for a department is one important piece in building an ethical environment. Providing officers with decision-making tools so they meet those high standards is another key element.
When you look at some of the tools we may want to give officers to try to make those decisions, one of those is the bell, book, and candle. When that is happening, are there alarm bells going off in your head? Because that's indication number one that this is not right. This may be an ethical dilemma, an ethical issue. So bell, is the bell going off? The book, very simply, are there any rules and regulations against it? Are there any laws against it? That's the second thing you might want to look at is there an issue with that? But then I think the third is really the most important in my opinion. That is the candle. Not if, but when this comes to light, how is it going to look for you individually, for your police department, and for your profession that this type of activity is going on? If this is on the front page of your local newspaper, how will you address that? Those are the things that a person should be really thinking about. Are there alarm bells? Is there something written about it, the book, and the candle, the light of day? When it comes out, how is that going to affect us? Even just the negative perception of, even though it may not be illegal, what's the perception of that?
Ethical dilemmas involve deciding between several alternatives when the best decision to make isn't always apparent. Depending on the situation, you can weigh competing aspects of a dilemma to help determine the best option. Some competing aspects to weigh in ethical dilemmas include truth versus loyalty, justice versus mercy, short-term versus long-term, individual versus community, and external rationale versus internal values.
The real challenge becomes, and this is a true ethical dilemma, is the right versus right decisions. You could go one way or the other, and somewhere along the line, somebody's probably going to lose or somebody's probably going to get hurt. One of the first paradigms in which you could look at an ethical dilemma is truth versus loyalty. I may know something, but if I divulge that, it may betray my loyalty to a certain person or an organization or an entity. And those become the real ethical dilemmas. How do I weigh that? That's where we don't want to fall into that trap of these either-or decisions. Well, it's got to be this way or that way. Somewhere within there is a balance where there is probably that third, fourth, or fifth alternative that we haven't thought about. Another paradigm in which you could view it is justice versus mercy. Somebody has messed up. It could be your kids. It could be a fellow officer. Discipline's going to have to come down. There's got to be a form of justice, so to speak, but how much discipline do I give them? I got to balance that with justice versus mercy. That is a tough ethical dilemma to be in. As human beings, oftentimes we can be sometimes self-centered creatures. We care sometimes only about those short-term immediate consequences. It's really important too that we also consider what are some of the long-term consequences and what's the best possible result. And you've got to be able to examine and look at it that, hey, this may be a great idea in the short term, but down the road, could this be a negative? Are there other people that might be affected down the road as well that we didn't even consider? Individual versus community. Oftentimes, again, we're human beings and we're going to want to make decisions sometimes that serve our best interest. But when we put on this badge and we put on this gun and we go out there and we've promised to serve the community, we got to remember that we need to balance it and serve our individual interests and balance that with also the community's interests as well. It's really easy to be influenced by external sources and external influences. We're human beings. That's naturally going to happen. The way to avoid some of those pitfalls is you've got to have some of those deep, intrinsic conversations with yourself and ask, what is it I value? What's most important to me? What are those things that I'm just not willing to give up? Be it my family, my commitment to service, the degree of dignity that I hold for human life and respect for others. Do I really hold those to be true? So those are your true ethical dilemmas. And some of the lenses in which you can view how you make some of those decisions is whether or not you want to take a cares-based approach. The decision I'm about to make is going to affect another human being. How much do I care about them? And so that's one way. I care about this person, so I'm going to make this decision that's going to be in the best interest for these people. There could be an ends-based, thinking about, hey, what are the long-term consequences of my decision? And then finally, there's rules-based, which, again, is not necessarily an ethical dilemma. If rules and policies and laws have been violated, it's not really an ethical dilemma. But it's also really important that we don't base all our decisions just on rules, because cops are ingenious human beings. And human beings are just ingenious creatures altogether. And if you give them a bunch of rules and you just base all your decisions on rules and policies, they're going to find ways around them, because that's what we do. You know, we're problem solvers. We're creative problem solvers. But if you tap into those uncompromisable aspects of your values and your virtues, those are the things that we need to be focusing on. And if you've identified those as an individual, and you as leaders in your organization help people identify those aspects that are uncompromisable, you're going to create much more of an ethical environment for your people.
I always believe that to set a big example for my daughters, and that keeps me ethically grounded. I can't go out and do something I expect them not to do, and it's the same thing within my profession.
I know personally what I do is I use the test of, can I look myself in the mirror at the end of the day? If I do that self-examination and I find that maybe I didn't handle a situation well, I didn't handle an interaction well, then I try to think about what other alternatives could I have used? What would be a way I could handle it better going forward in the future?
A big thing is surround yourself with people that share the same ethical values and beliefs that you do. And if you surround yourself with those people, you know, you're going to be in a much better position to avoid those big ethical problems. But also, those people are going to hold you accountable to the ethics that you personally subscribe to and that group subscribes to.
As officers travel through their careers, they will encounter certain pivotal choices that will change the path they follow. It is at these times, more than ever, that officers must apply an ethical perspective in making decisions that will profoundly affect themselves and others around them.
Are you off tomorrow night?
Yeah.
Well, I'm off tomorrow night, and some of the girls are off. We're going to get together, and we're going to go out. You want to go with?
Sure. My divorce is final, and I'm a free woman. What do you think of the new Explorer?
Yeah, he's a good-looking guy. I know a lot of girls think he's cute. But he's 19 years old. He's way too young.
Doesn't he have a ride-along schedule with you?
Yeah, I'm scheduled for next week.
You mind if I take him?
I guess not.
Good. Your advisor's not here, so I'm going to be conducting the inspection. Garcia, fix your pens. Clark, you look good. Abrams, next time, iron your shirt better. Fix your collar. Look good, Sanchez. Okay, dismissed.
Yes, ma'am. Must be nice to be so special.
This is definitely going to create some good conversation. What are some of the problems that we just saw in that video?
Well, she's in a position of authority, not only just being an officer, but the fact that the cadets, I mean, they're pretty much entry level at best, and she's kind of using that to her advantage for other motives.
For other motives, okay. So she has this kind of this mentor-mentee relationship, correct? Okay, and she might have been taken a little bit too far. Do you agree with that?
Definitely.
And what are some of the problems that can arise out of that?
If it turns into something like a quid pro quo type relationship, since she is in a supervisory position, even though she may not have any rank, it's still, that person is still in a position of leadership and authority.
Much like an FTO and a deputy.
Correct.
He may, most likely, he's probably going to try to become a deputy or an officer, correct, somewhere? Okay. Could he feel like he's being harassed because, hey, if I don't go out with her, if I don't do a certain thing, then that may affect my chances of becoming a deputy or an officer? Correct? Okay. What potential consequences does this have if this gets out and the community hears about this?
Outrage.
Outrage, why?
Because, like you said, she's his mentor and has that authority over him. And it just, the age difference, I mean, we don't need to go into that, but I mean, public view, public perception, it's just wrong.
No different than a school teacher and a student. There's a boundary that has been crossed.
Okay.
That the public has a reasonable expectation we shouldn't cross.
Excellent point. But does it make any difference that this explorer is 19 years old?
You can say 19 to your boom face, they're going off what they see. And so that perception is showing that, you know, someone who's older, who has this authority, is going after this younger, naive person who's just getting to know the job.
Okay, good. So there's this power and influence type of issue, correct? Okay. We saw in the video the one female officer talking to the other female officer and saying, hey, can I take your ride along? Did it look to you like she thought this other officer who had the ride along in the beginning thought there might have been a problem? What obligation does she have to say something, or does she?
She could just take her aside and say, hey, you know what, probably not a good idea. And no, I'll go ahead and I'll keep the ride along to myself as far as, you know, if you want to have the ride along, go ahead and sign up for a shift yourself. Don't put her in the predicament to where she's going to possibly damage your career. So you just cut it off at the knees.
In the future, this becomes a problem. The 19-year-old explorer files a complaint and there's some type of civil lawsuit. If we don't say anything, are we setting ourselves up and the department up in a liability standpoint?
Yes. Like it or not, we're in a perception business. We do our jobs based on perception, and people base us on their perception. Just the word cadet gives the negative sound of a 16-year-old, even though when he could or she could be 21 years old and they could legally wed. It's the perception, and we live, as he said, on that double standard. It's unfortunate, but it's reality.
Okay, so perception is definitely a reality
for us.
In someone else. Okay, in someone else's mind. Good.
But I mean, reporting it is also protecting the department, because who's to say he wasn't along with it, and then later on he gets upset with the department, they don't hire him as a peace officer, then he turns around and files sexual harassment during this time, and we saw him leave in the car with her. I mean, there's nothing documented, nothing to show otherwise. I mean, he pretty much wins.
Or she moves on to another cadet.
That too.
Well, good point. So it could not only affecting him, there's other male cadets or explorers inside our organization. So what's to say she's not going to go for another cadet explorer, correct? Okay. Is there a good potential this whole incident may go viral and it may go outside the department and the public find out?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, if it does, why might a parent be apprehensive about now sending their child, 18, 19, 15, 16-year-old, be afraid to send them to our Explorer program?
Well, the explorers sign up with the program to learn and get guidance within the law enforcement field, not to be picked up by the officers or the deputies they are working with.
The parents have a reasonable expectation to believe that their son or daughter is going to be treated as an employee and not as possible pickup from other officers.
Okay, so the parent of a 15-year-old boy or girl is going to be concerned about sending them to our Explorer program.
There's certainly, you could make a case that with regard to law and with regard to policy, this officer's had no violations.
It may very well not be illegal, but again, it's that gray area between ethical and legal where that decision's being made where it's getting us in trouble.
And that's the problem that we fall into when we just rely on rules and policies and the rule of law rather than the spirit of what it means to be a truly ethical human being.
The fact that you're going to try and determine where the legal-illegal boundary is hopefully not the standard that police officers draw for themselves. When it gets right down to it, the law is the basement of conduct, the basement of acceptability, and then there might be the issue of policy, which is a little elevated from that.
One of the traps that we fall into is that if you're going to be basing all your decisions on rules and policies, just because some rule says that we can do something or that there's no punishment because we do something, that then it's got to be the right thing to do. And I think that's the wrong way in which to view your decision making.
One of the things we can't do, as we see just in the society in general, is you can't legislate every single thing. You know, you can't have a rule and regulation that's going to address every single situation that we're going to find. So you may not have a rule regulation that deals with a special relationship, but you have to look at it, step back, look at it through the prism of ethics, and is it the ethical thing to do?
And so that's why it's so important that you have your value system, those uncompromisables, you know, your strong value and virtue systems. That if you don't have them, it's going to be very easy to fall into that trap of, well, if it's legal, it's okay for me to do that.
A lot of times people, their own personal interest sometimes may get ahead of their ethics.
But if it's an action that makes you feel uncomfortable, or if it's something that you are going to feel uncomfortable about explaining, then that should be a red flag.
There's very few people that could look at that scenario and not sort of have this feeling, oh, there's something wrong here. This just doesn't feel right. So what do you do with that feeling?
And really that's where your personal ethics come into play, as well as the organizational ethics. And really you look at what does it mean to be a police officer? What does it mean to be a police officer when you're looked up to by explorers or other people in the department?
But I wouldn't think that there's any police officer that understands the responsibilities of leadership, that understands the responsibilities of mentorship, that knows what is involved in an explorer post, that wouldn't be troubled, wouldn't be seriously troubled by the attitude that this officer is displaying towards a young explorer.
You look upon it as being a teacher-student relationship. You don't cross that line.
If we begin to take advantage of that role and break down that mentorship process, then again, we're looking to set ourselves up for problems.
When you are a mentor, in a mentor position, in a position of authority, and you're supposed to be teaching and training these young people, to take advantage of that relationship, it is unethical.
We have an obligation to help our younger officers, or in the case of explorers, to mentor them, to show them the proper way to be a professional law enforcement officer.
What's your obligation to be that role model in the organization? And are you living up to that by dating a 19-year-old?
What is her intent, and how is her behavior? How is the way she's conducting herself going to impact this young man, and how are other officers going to perceive it?
Because your actions just don't affect yourself. They affect your family. They affect your peers. They affect the department and what you represent. They're going to affect the community.
Think about your decisions. What are the consequences for you? What are the consequences for all those people involved? What are the consequences for the community that we serve, the public that we serve, the parents who may have someone or think about having someone in that Explorer program? Enormous consequences because of a very selfish, unethical act.
Talk about parents. I think you wonder how would a parent view something like this, and obviously that's going to be something that's going to have a negative impact on the parents, not only of that explorer, but anyone else that they might talk to. It's going to have a very negative effect on the entire program.
You know, when you're talking about your values, those things that I hold true and that are uncompromisable, you want to make sure that those are things that are congruent with your organization, and that, you know, even though there may be times where there is that lack of congruency, where maybe people in the organization aren't acting ethically, or maybe the organization itself has done something that is in violation of your values and virtue system, you still can't compromise you. Those are the things that you have control over.
We have a tendency that everybody knows this individual is a jerk, and no one wants to deal with the problem at hand. And those are the ones that are giving our departments in law enforcement a bad name.
Well, everybody's got that guy in their organization, that guy or that gal that may or may not be doing something that's questionable. But remember, that guy or that gal is also a human being. That's someone that we also need to be spending time building a foundation and building relationships with, so that we can build up the moral courage to go up to them and contact them.
It's incumbent not only on the officer who's making the bad choice, but those around the officer. They have an ethical obligation to say, hold on a second, something's not right here. You know, let's talk about this. I don't necessarily have to report you, but I'm going to talk to you about it and say, do you think that's a good idea?
having people around you that are going to keep that ethical compass for you and that are going to keep you grounded ethically is very important.
As officers travel through their careers, they will encounter certain pivotal choices that will change the path they follow. It is at these times, more than ever, that officers must apply an ethical perspective in making decisions that will profoundly affect themselves and others around them.
Modeling the behavior and creating a culture of good ethics starts with each and every individual. And obviously, you do set a tone at the top. And what you want to do is every single time somebody does something good, you want to affirm that behavior.
Well, the reward systems work well, given the right context. You want to reward your people for doing a good job. You want to reward the individual for doing something above and beyond. It has to be consistent. If two individuals go out and do the same thing, they deserve the same recognition.
You want to praise and reward and recognize ethical behavior. There's a big difference, though, between, you don't want to use it as a carrot and stick. If you're using the recognition and the reward almost as a surprise, almost like from the lens of, now that you've done this, hey, I'd like to showcase what a great job that was. That's the right way to approach it. But we've got to be celebrating those successes within our organization. We've got to be praising our employees and not only telling them, hey, you did a good job, but here's why. This is why it was so good, because it matched our values as an organization. It was absolutely congruent with what society expects from us. Those are the things that we want to capture when we are praising and recognizing our people for, making the right choices, which they mostly do most of the time.
Well, I think the ethical decision process is always about doing the best that you can, about doing what you believe is right. And sometimes that's going to be in conflict with others, whether it's partners, members of the community, command staff. The fact of the matter is that you should be operating on a regular basis with the idea that I'm going to go out, I'm going to do the best job I can on a regular basis. That means making decisions based on what you think is right, obviously taking into consideration the law, policy and procedure, all the things that we're regulated by, but you still have to take it a step further and look to what is the best for this given situation. What would I be proud to say I made a decision about and be willing to stand by, whether or not everyone agrees with it?
Knowing the ethical answer is one thing, but having the courage to do what is right, despite the conflicts it will create, is vital to completing the ethical decision-making process. Taking action is the only way that officers and the teams they work in can truly operate according to a high standard. And communication is essential when working at such a level.
The bottom line is that high-performing teams emphasize communication amongst their team members. That's something that's important to a high-performing team. Teams that don't perform well don't communicate well. And that's not complicated. That's a very basic understanding. If you're communicating well with your team members, you and your team are going to perform at a higher level. If you don't communicate, then you're not very good at what you do.
90.1, I'm in full pursuit of a burglary suspect eastbound Main Street from 3rd Avenue.
1 is in pursuit of a burglary suspect eastbound Main from 3rd Avenue. Unit to respond.
90 Paul 3, I'm close. Show me route code 3.
Paul 1, taser deploy.
90 Paul 3, going on scene.
Stay down, stay down, stay down, stay down. Put your arms out. Don't. Get your arms behind your back. Put your arms behind your back now.
Asshole! I am!
I'm gonna cuff him.
You wish, bitch!
Hold on. He needs another ride. Okay, go in. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Hey, brother.
Hey.
Hey, that guy we arrested this morning was a real ass.
Yeah.
Are you going to do a supplemental?
Yeah, I can do one.
Okay. Can you take a look at my report and make sure we're on the same page?
Okay. I guess.
All right.
Make sure we're on the same page.
Okay, I guess.
What did we just see?
An inappropriate use of force.
Why is that?
The person had complied with the directives to put his hands behind his back, even though he was being verbally abusive. Could the officer have come in and cuffed him? Yes. If he had done something physical at that point, he could have released, and the other officer could have continued deploying the taser. Looking at the report, you always should look at each other's reports to make sure that the dates and times are correct, that the minutia of the report is correct. However, this video tends to imply that maybe the cover officer is going to have to either omit some information or add information to make them clear and concise and that they look like they're together.
Excellent. So when you're talking about accuracy, is it okay for officers or deputies to review each other's reports?
Yes.
Okay, but what about consistency?
Well, when you're writing a use of force report like that, you have to write what you saw, okay, and what you felt, not what the other deputy or other officer there felt. Because eventually, if this goes to court, he's going to have to testify to what he saw.
Why didn't he say anything to the officer that issued the second deployment? Why didn't he do anything? Or, should he have done anything?
I would say, as a second officer in many of these situations, that maybe he didn't see what this other gentleman's saying. The connotation there is he's giving us punitive, but on the other hand, I didn't see it. And maybe the officer's thinking about how he's going to approach this officer later on in the report room to discuss what occurred.
We don't know that this other officer can, intimidate him. He's a smaller guy, and the main officer was a bigger guy. Maybe he's afraid to say anything.
Very true.
Might not have that relationship where they are comfortable enough with each other that they can bring up these issues.
Very good. So this officer saying to make sure we're on the same page, what kind of connotation does it have?
To maybe not put in something he saw or add something that didn't really happen.
Yeah, please.
Then we have also the public, who's to say, John Doe isn't around the corner and here's that statement. The perception is that, he did it to punish the person and he had the person under control, but he just decided on his own to do it, to punish him more.
Okay, good. And in fact, in that video, as he's rolling in code, didn't you see there's a couple older, an adult and maybe some small children? How does that, he needs the ride, look to or he needs another ride or something to that effect, look to them?
Looks bad.
Okay. And with the advent or the use of cell phones and social media we talked about earlier, how quick is this incident going to be up on a social media website?
Seconds.
Okay. What obligation does that second officer have to the agency, to the community, and the first officer to actually say something or bring it up?
I think that you have what is probably like an implied liability. You as the person that saw the taser deployment, that knew the taser deployment was done punitively, or at least that could be just your opinion that's done punitively. You still have that obligation to document it correctly. That documentation is going to be read by a supervisor, who, then it's incumbent upon the supervisor to take it upon himself or herself to further investigate whether this was done per department policy or it's outside department policy.
Okay, good point. You see something like this, the bell's ringing in the background, the hair on your neck is standing up. How would a junior officer or another officer or a deputy go approach this? Go approach this first officer? They probably have to work together again and continuing, right? How do you approach that?
You just kind of got to do it. You got to pull them off to the side after the fact and away from everybody else,
Okay.
And just let them know that what he might have did could have been inappropriate, and don't get me involved in something like this again.
Okay. So maybe setting up parameters like I'm not going to tolerate something like this. Okay. But what on the flip side, say like the second officer, because obviously there's just a video, we don't know everything that happened. What happens if there's something else on this video that we didn't see, and actually that second taser deployment, let's say for the sake of argument, it was proper. That might be a good, so this officer the second officer doesn't have bad feelings. He actually may find out why he deployed the taser on the second deployment, correct? So it may not always be negative, correct? Okay.
In the taser scenario, I think that's something that we find ourselves as police officers in that situation a lot, where we're responding to an officer that needs help, assistance, and we get there and we don't know what transpired before we got there. We don't know all the circumstances. We just know somebody needs help. We're there to help.
You know, a lot of times, you know, kind of a warning bell goes off, and we'll see something that wasn't right, that didn't match what feels good for us intrinsically.
If you don't feel right about something, you need to confront it. You can't bury your head in the sand. He needs to confront that officer and say, hey, what did I miss here? Let's talk about why we tased that guy. Why did you tase that guy a second time?
But oftentimes, the one thing that prevents us from having that conversation with somebody that may have done something that caused that red flag to go up is we don't have a relationship with that person. We haven't spent time getting to know that person, maybe having, you know, a little bit deeper conversation about the things that they value and things that are important to them, building those relationships. Because if you do not do that, you don't lay that foundation, then you can't have those tough, courageous conversations that you have to have. And the other thing too is sometimes those tough, courageous conversations doesn't necessarily have to be as uncomfortable as people think. It can really have a good outcome.
Maybe there's a great explanation for it, and by you coming forward and talking to him, that's going to clear it up. And now you're not questioning the ethics of this officer. You understand why he did it. And maybe if there is an issue and you're not comfortable with it, that needs to be addressed.
There was no conversation immediately after they got that person into the patrol car. That's where the conversation should have taken place, right then and there. When you have that relationship, those things are going to occur much faster. And when you are, rather than letting something fester and get worse, you've actually dealt with it right away. And that's the best way to handle it.
And that's sort of the delayed intervention opportunity, where you might not have had an opportunity to stop something, but you certainly have an opportunity to respond to it. And I think the cover officer in this case needs to take a deep breath and say, well, you know, I don't think we are on the same page, and I think we need to talk about it.
And as far as looking at police reports, you know, looking at a fellow officer's report to make sure that the facts are consistent, time, all these other types of things, there's not a problem with that. When you're asking somebody to look at your report to make sure you're on the same page, well, what do you mean by that? In a lot of circumstances, that's fine.
It's not unusual in law enforcement to have several different perspectives from a given scene. We all see things from a slightly different angle. We get involved in an incident at a slightly different time period. And so it's not unusual to have some differences there, and that's okay. I think that there's a tendency sometimes to want to make sure that everything lines up perfectly, and that's just not the way that things normally happen.
I don't think there's anything wrong with officers reviewing. As a matter of fact, they should review each other's reports to make sure they're accurate, you know, as to what happened, to make sure that none of the elements of the crime have been left out, that all the elements are addressed from each officer, so that you have a complete picture of a case that you may be sending to, you know, the district attorney's office, or maybe for use of force or whatever it may be. When you start asking other officers to check it for content and to check it for, are we on the same page, as in, are we going to say that we saw the same thing even though it may not be true, then we start running into a lot of problems.
You can be consistent in a lie. You can be consistent in unethical behavior, and that can indeed be, you know, consistent. The ethical component is the accuracy. Is this the truth? And oftentimes I think we lose sight of that. It is important to be consistently accurate. It is important to be consistently truthful in our ethical decisions.
Well, I'm going to write it a certain way so it'll make it past my supervisor and they won't question it then. Well, now you've created an issue. Okay, you've lied. And if you get caught with that lie, you're going to get fired. Or you're going to lose, you know, something that means a whole lot to you.
And that's when we start getting into the courageous conversations where you tell your partner officer, you know, this is what I saw and this is what I heard and this is what I'm writing in the report. You know, it may be different than what you say in your report, but this is the truth as I saw it.
Our word in law enforcement is our most valuable asset. Lying is going to diminish our credibility, and not just the individual, but the profession's credibility. So when somebody lies, the saying of "you lie, you die" hits so close to home. I mean, that is the most important thing.
And the decisions they make, they need to be aware that, to be conscious of that. It could affect their families, it could affect the department, and they're not just in this by themselves.
Communicating with your partner early and often is the best option to avoid some of the ethical traps that can catch officers later. Once officers realize this, they need to develop skills to deal with the difficult situations they will need to take action on.
But one of the things that we have to realize in our profession, even in life, is not making a decision is an ethical decision. You know, not doing something, not acting, not saying something is an ethical decision.
Saying no sometimes is one of the biggest acts of courage, and one of the biggest acts of moral courage that you can have. And as with anything that's going to take courage and skill to do, you've got to practice.
Well, in police work, we spend a lot of time in training, rightfully so. And most of the training we do is very physical.
You have to be prepared in this career to have these really courageous conversations with people.
And I think what officers really need to challenge themselves with is, on occasion, to test their moral imagination, the physical imagination, but also the moral imagination, and ask themselves, how am I going to respond when I am suddenly confronted with a situation that I know might not require a physical reaction, but a moral one? And these circumstances do come up.
The fact of the matter is that you're the only one that knows how much preparation you've done. Are you ready to handle the incidents, or are you kind of fooling yourself into thinking that you're prepared, but you've become complacent?
Once officers have mentally practiced their ethical fitness and prepared themselves to act, they need to decide what level of intervention is appropriate in a given situation.
There's really 3 levels of intervention when it comes right down to it. There's the idea of advanced intervention, delayed intervention, and immediate intervention. Immediate intervention is that very uncomfortable situation where an officer really does need to step in, or perhaps an officer's in a situation where they're just not responding as they should, and it might even be a physical danger, but it might be something where the situation is going to become problematic in another way, and an officer needs to be prepared to step in. Then there's the idea of delayed intervention, where maybe something has happened in a previous shift, or maybe an officer's made some observations of a partner, and they have an opportunity over a cup of coffee, or maybe during off duty to talk about some of the observations they made. But probably the one that is the most helpful is when an officer can learn the skills of advanced intervention. And advanced intervention is when an officer has that sort of reputation, and has that sort of leadership ability, and has that sort of their own personal ethics, where when that officer's on the scene, it just has a way of elevating the game. It has a way of having other officers know that they need to step up, because this is a person that has very high expectations of everyone they work with. It isn't acquired overnight, and it isn't something that comes easily. But I think you establish advanced intervention by setting a very high standard for yourself and letting other people know that you set a high standard for the people that work with you.
Career survival in an ethical perspective is something that I think that we don't talk enough about in our initial training and continued professional training. Every police officer is familiar with the LEOCA study. That's law enforcement officers killed and assaulted in the line of duty. And invariably, every year when the LEOCA study is done, what it shows is that the average tenure of officers who are killed in line of duty is around 7 years. There was also a study done of officers that were decertified or fired for ethical issues. And what that study showed is those officers that were fired, the average tenure of those officers was 7 years. And when you put those two studies together, we all know about LEOCA, and we all know that that 7-year mark indicates to us that there's some kind of complacency. Those officers have become complacent in their officer safety, officer survival skills. If you look at the ethical study of those officers that were fired and decertified after 7 years, there's ethical complacency. And that's something that I think that we don't recognize, is that you can become complacent in your own personal safety, officer safety, the things you do to keep yourself physically safe. But are we recognizing the fact that you can become ethically complacent?
There are many threats that peace officers face throughout their career, and often the greatest threats come from within. These can build up so subtly over time that it sometimes takes a vivid reminder of what we were originally called to do in order to stay on the right path.
Hey man, you've been kind of quiet today. Is everything all right?
Man, I got reamed by this place again. You believe I got written up for missing one thing in that new pursuit policy? I mean, you can't even do your job anymore without getting reprimanded for something stupid. I'll tell you what, man, I'm done. I'm shutting down. The only thing this place is getting from me is just handling calls when they come in.
Whoa, did you just see that?
I can't let that go.
Be out on traffic, older model, green Mazda. Stand by for further. There he is.
All units, be advised the kidnapping that just occurred 5 ago. Suspect is a male, white, in his 30s, wearing a black shirt. Suspect was also last seen driving a dark-colored Mazda sedan, partial plate of 4-boy King Frank. Victim is a female Hispanic, 10 years of age, last seen wearing a pink top and blue jeans.
That was scary. What did we just see? This officer had a bad attitude, right? Just got disciplined, got in trouble for something he didn't think he did or didn't deserve. How did that, or how could that have affected his job?
I think if he was alone, he wouldn't have went after the guy. Since he was kind of disgruntled over his command staff writing him up for having an error on a pursuit report, he considered to shut down and just handle radio calls instead of being a proactive officer going out there and looking for stuff to do.
Okay, good. So you think if he wasn't alone, that it could have been a tragic consequence by him not going and helping that little girl?
Yeah.
Okay. Did that partner officer or deputy should he have said anything when this officer was venting?
Sometimes, I was going to say, sometimes it's just good to listen to your partner vent. Let him get the steam out and say, you know what? It's okay to talk.
And he was observant enough to notice something was wrong with him and ask him about it. You know, open the door up for that type of conversation between the two as being partners.
Okay, good. I'm sorry, you're going to?
I was just gonna say, I mean, he was venting, I think, but overall, I think he realized that, you know, he still has a job to do and he can't help himself because that's what he went into. So I think he felt like, you know, I still have to do what I have to do. And I think it hit home even more when he realized what he had in front of him, which was this poor little girl was just kidnapped. And because of that decision that he made, it actually saved her life.
Okay, very good. So that outcome actually could have changed his whole perspective on things, correct?
Definitely.
Okay. Okay, is his response to getting disciplined, is it understandable, his feeling negative?
Yes, nobody's harder on you than yourself, especially when you've put together a good investigation and for some reason you accidentally omitted a necessary part of it, and then you are, I don't want to use the word punishment, but you are disciplined by supervision. And yes, you would like to continue on and still do the job that you are, you know, paid to do. It just seems to take the wind out of your sails for just that briefest of times, until you've kind of reset your moral compass and you're on your way.
Okay, very good.
And in this case, I mean, had he not made the stop, I mean, you think about the grand effect, not only, I mean, on the girl that was kidnapped, but then any other victims he might have in the future, then society's perception. I mean, my neighbor's house gets broken into. I might not be a victim physically, but from that point on, I don't feel safe. I'm going to be locking my doors. Much like if someone in the community had their child kidnapped, I'm going to be, you know, a little bit more overcautious and feel insecure about my child and having to protect them at every corner.
I like what you said is resetting your moral compass is, yeah, we got a job to do no matter what. We got in this for a reason, and we've got to remember the oath that we took when we first got into this profession. Bad days, we're going to have good days, but no matter what, we owe it to the community, we owe it to ourselves and the profession to make sure we continue with those high ethical standards.
I think it's only normal that we do try to do our best every day, and when discipline comes down, it's never easy. And we are human. We are allowed to have our emotions, but I think that's where our brotherhood comes in, and it's good to vent. It's good to help each other out and kind of help us reset that moral compass.
Very good. So, again, it's our friends, it's our brothers and sisters in law enforcement. If we see an employee, whether we're their partner that night or what, but someone seems down, what obligation do we have to them to go to them and say, hey, look, is everything okay?
We should. Oh, we should. Yeah. Not just as a partner, but as a friend. Okay? We should be able to do that to our partners.
Okay. Because you never know what they're going to tell you, and someone finally comes up and says, hey, look, I need some help, and you can get them that help they need.
Every police officer in their career has either felt that or will feel that feeling that, they've been disciplined, they've been corrected, they're angry, and they want to shut down. And I think all of us go through that phase, and I think all of us have experienced that in one time or another in our careers.
We've been there. There's been those times where we have felt wronged by the organization or institution that we may work for. And the reality is that may be the case. And it's really easy to get caught up in and consumed by that type of emotional response.
Well, the scenario struck me as interesting because it really keyed in on what I refer to as administratively induced stress, and that's where so much of our stress comes from in law enforcement. It's internal. It's within our organizations. We're in an environment where it is very restrictive, or there are going to be situations where we're held accountable or we're held to answer in a way that is not pleasant.
But one of the things that is really important for us to always remember deep down is why did we get in the job in the first place? Why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? And we have an ethical obligation to do our job and to do it right. Always, no matter what the situation is.
We got into this profession to serve others. And I honestly believe there is no higher purpose than the ability to be able to serve others.
A career is a long period of time. And just like anything else we do in life, there's going to be some highs and there's going to be some lows. You're not always going to get commended for everything you do right. You're not always going to get punished for the things that you don't do well.
If we let our emotions become consumed by wrongs that have been, or perceived wrongs that have been enacted upon us, then we are doing a complete disservice to the community, and we're not giving them what they deserve.
And we don't have the luxury of shutting down. We don't have the luxury of getting angry and being somewhat childish about, I'm not going to do anything, and I'm just going to sit here and go to calls, and that's it. They're going to get nothing else out of me.
And you're also really denying yourself the opportunity to go out there and impact somebody's life in a really positive way. We are in such a unique position that every contact, everything that we do has the potential to positively impact somebody's life. And it could be something seemingly so small and so insignificant, but it could be so profound. And those are the things that we need to remind our officers to do. And we need to remind ourselves to do, that this is why we do what we do.
Regardless of we have a bad day or we think we were inadvertently punished for something that we didn't deserve, you know what? Well, if that's the case, then you need to address that situation with the supervisor and try to address that. But you can't shut down. You can't do that to the community.
We have to be on 100% every single day, not only for our physical survival, but also our career survival and for our ultimate policing mission to the public, the people we work for, the people we have sworn to protect.
We've chosen this path and we've chosen this responsibility, and that's what we have to do, and kind of fight through it and make sure that we're out there doing the best job we can every day. We don't do it for the money. We don't do it necessarily to make our bosses happy. We do it because it's what we've chosen to do and it's the right thing to do.
But this officer, he did a certain amount of talking with his partner, but then when the time came, he stepped up. and he did the right thing. He didn't let that situation of administratively induced stress get in the way of him doing his job. And in this particular case, obviously, that had very, very serious ramifications.
Organizations can also combat complacency by establishing an environment of accountability. These organizations have clear expectations of their officers and ensure they meet the ethical standards through open dialogue and inquiry.
To create accountability, you have to establish an environment where people feel free and safe to speak about topics that they might not necessarily speak up about if they fear that something is going to happen.
When you look at folks that have good working relationships, you see that they're very comfortable in those kind of discussions. They're very comfortable in those kind of courageous conversations. And I guess the question from an ethical perspective, from an organizational perspective, is do we support those kind of discussions? Do we allow people? Do we encourage people? Do we model those kind of discussions, those kind of conversations in organizations?
I'd go back to the relationship of that frontline leader and in most cases the patrol officer, and the requirement of a real understanding based on communication. And hopefully it's the kind of communication that's almost entirely positive, where officers are encouraging the right behavior and they're rewarding the right behavior, and they're talking about all the things that they're doing well, really looking for people doing things right. But at the same time, when things don't go well, when things don't go according to plan, or when we could have done a better job, that we all sit down and debrief those incidents. And if need be, in private. If it's a one-on-one, so be it. If it's something you can talk about in front of a team, all the better. But to have that sort of honest communication in law enforcement is really essential. Without it, teams just don't perform at a very high level.
When we respond to critical incidents, oftentimes I'll come up and I'll ask them, what do you have? What's your plan for that? And what resources do you need? And I typically try to help them with those things. I think that type of simple concept can be applied to ethical decision making. I think it's as simple as, what am I confronting? What's the problem here? What am I planning on doing, or what are my alternatives? What am I thinking about doing? And what help or what other resources do I need in order to make a good decision?
So I think those conversations, the accountability that we establish, the responsibility that we have towards the public, towards each other, towards this noble profession of policing, all those things are so important.
So communicating and having a free flow of communication of information is probably the most important way of creating an environment that's accountable.
Honest, open, sometimes difficult conversations. That's really where ethics is important in the organization.
We have come to the end of this training course on ethical decision making. On behalf of the California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, I would like to thank you for your participation in this course. We leave you with a story from one of our subject matter experts of an incident that serves as a reminder of the enormous responsibility we share to protect and serve the public.
I was just coming on to shift, and the other shift was getting off, and they had received a late call of a possible trespasser or a prowler. And on its face, it seemed like this was just somebody that was drunk, and according to him, said he was trying to make his way into the wrong trailer. He was confused and went into the wrong trailer. I really felt in my gut that there was something more to it. I just couldn't put my finger on it. And so I had a couple choices. The easy choice would be we would just put this guy in a detox facility, be done with him, he's drunk. And that's what most everyone wanted to do, and I can understand that because it was the end of their shift. They're tired, they want to go home. And it was also the beginning of my shift, and when you come on, usually you want to go out and get a cup of coffee and begin the day right. But I was faced with this crossroad. Do we take it a little bit deeper? And I really felt like, well, we can take it a little bit further and make this a potential trespass situation. And one of the things that we did was, so that we could identify him down the road as a piece of evidence, was a jacket that he was wearing. So we collected that. And as I'm booking him, my partner comes in to the booking facility and says, "Hey, Jim, you got to come in here and see this." And inside his jacket was a pair of flex cuffs and a butcher knife. And right there, it became readily apparent and readily clear that there was something more to this, that this person was there for a specific intent and a specific purpose to rape and severely harm this woman who lived in this particular motorhome. And, through an interview, we were able to get him to admit that not only was that's why he was there in the first place, but we also came to realize that he admitted in the interview that he was there a week prior and was lying in wait for her to come home. But she was actually out of town, so she didn't come home like expected. And we also came to find out that he was also responsible for one of the most brutal rapes we had our city had ever seen at that time. And he was there to do it again. And so that's just a great example of giving a little bit more. That we owe the community. We owe the community our absolute best in those times that when we are tired, or we could go, a more lackadaisical route. That we owe the community to go a little bit further, because had we not, that could have been absolute tragedy, and that's just something that I'm personally not willing to live with.
This course is designed to be facilitated in a group setting. Before conducting a group training session, you should review and become familiar with the material in this program. Open and print the facilitator guide and go through the material yourself before putting the course on for others. As the facilitator, your job is to engage your students in constructive, free-flowing discussion on the key learning points in this training topic, stimulate critical thinking and situational awareness in the group by viewing the scenarios, expert interviews, and discussion videos. Questions and activities are provided to promote group interaction and discussion on the training topic. Customize the learning experience by applying your agency policy and procedures to the training concepts. Segments in this program accommodate shorter training periods, such as during roll call training sessions. Track your students' progress through the entire program. Once the students have successfully completed the program, submit your training roster to post for CPT credit. Following this plan will help to create an environment for the debate of ideas, sharing of wisdom based on experience, and encourage a greater understanding of local policies and procedures. We wish you and your agency all the best in successfully implementing this program. This course is designed to be facilitated in a group setting. However, when that is not possible, here are some instructions for getting the most out of this training program so that you may receive continuing professional training or CPT credit. Let your supervisor know that you will be viewing the program. This will give them some time to review the course themselves and be prepared to discuss it with you later on. Open and print the student workbook so you can take notes and fill out responses to the questions and activities. Think about how the training concepts presented apply to your agency policy and procedures. You may view the scenarios, expert interviews, and discussion videos several times to assist you in providing responses. Keep track of your progress as you complete segments in the course. When you have finished the entire program, inform your supervisor that you would like to review the course with them. Send them your completed student workbook prior to meetings so that they have a chance to review your responses. Your supervisor may require additional work or feedback from you before giving CPT credit. It is up to their discretion to determine whether you have adequately completed the course. Following these instructions will give you the best opportunity not only to receive CPT credit, but to grasp the training concepts, benefit from the experience of others, and apply the training and experience to your local policy and procedures. We wish you and your agency all the best in successfully completing this course.
Bye.